Welcome back for another episode of Before the Pulpit. Glad that you're with us. If you're watching or listening, we hope that this episode will be beneficial to you. As you know, we've stopped doing the Through Their Eyes podcast, and we've shifted to more of a preacher-centered podcast. The goal for this is twofold. One, we're hopeful that we could encourage preachers where they're at in their ministry with certain topics, but also encouraging the members to know more about preaching and how it, behaves as a job and how the things different, ebb and flow of the workforce and the workflow of it. And so today's topic is kind of centered not just toward preachers, but as I introduce it in just a moment, it's really something that everyone, I believe, could benefit from today. And so, as always, Wayne Rogers has to be here. Wayne, good to see you.
Glad to be here.
And we also have with us today Epifanio Carranza. Epifanio, tell us about who you are and your ministry and when you graduated from the school.
Okay, so my name is Epifanio Carranza. I graduated from Memphis in 2022. I currently labor with the Eastridge Church of Christ as the youth and family minister there. And before that, I was doing, local work, pulpit minister in Texas.
Yeah.
I'm married, have 3 boys. My wife, Karen, and I, we've been married for 16 years now. So kind of young, but when I tell people that, they're like, "Man, how have you made it? This long, being so young?"
I don't believe that y'all are that old.
Yeah, well, believe it. Trust me. Every time I get out of, every morning I get out of bed, it reminds me, like you're not 20 anymore. So yeah. So
well, good deal. Well, we're glad. What year did you graduate from?
2022.
2022. Yeah. That's right. Because I had just started the year during your first year, I believe, or the start of your second year.
Yeah, I
had just started at the school, and man, a lot of stuff's happened between now and that's crazy. It's been that short of a time, but it's also been a while.
Right. Well, we went through COVID too. So that was the time we were at school during COVID. Yeah. So it was crazy.
What a time to have gone through the Memphis School of Preaching, shelter in place. As we're going to talk in just a moment, we'll stop looking at you guys in the audience. We'll just look at each other. But before we do that, I just wanted to make sure to let you all know what we're talking about today. Teaching that stays. And the idea behind that is memorable classes and lessons. We're not just talking about specifically prop teaching, though that is sometimes a part of what is discussed and is beneficial and helpful. We're just talking about memorable teaching in general. And so as we're going to get into this topic today, we're going to be discussing the idea of being the best teacher of the Bible we can be. Wayne, let's get started.
All right. Epifanio, what makes a class interactive and memorable?
Okay. So thinking really hard about this, and before we get, I tackle that question per se, I do want to, kind of give my thought process behind this question. When you look at scripture, the Bible tells us a lot about Jesus and how he's our example. And the Bible calls Jesus many things in scripture. He's a prophet, he's a priest, he's a king, he's a preacher, but he's also known as a teacher. And those who follow Jesus are disciples. Mm-hmm. And the term implies someone who's being taught or learner, right? The term actually means. And so, and when you study his life, Luke gives us a very good indication of what I believe a teacher must ultimately exemplify. In Luke 2:52, Luke tells us that Jesus grew in 4 ways. Right? He grew spiritually, he grew socially, he grew physically, and he grew mentally. He grew in favor with God and man, and he grew in stature. And so, if we're going to be teachers, I like this idea. Number one, a teacher's character will make the class interactive and memorable. Mm. And so when you think about those things that Luke writes about Jesus, when you look at the life of Christ, character has to be number one. And I'm so convinced about this. I was reading a book by I think his name is Guy P. Leavitt, and he makes a point in that book where he says, ultimately, this is my take from it, from a paragraph, influence will outlive any method. And so when you think about teaching, it's hard because you don't want to elevate self, but you do have to understand that your personality is going to come out in your teaching, in your class. And so there was this. So I have enough time to share a quick story, right? Sure. So about my high school math teacher, when I obeyed the gospel, I didn't know any religious man but him. I didn't know he was a member of the church. I just knew he was a very religious man. And the reason why I knew that is he was my math teacher, and I don't remember anything he taught me in math, okay? Mm. What I do remember is the way he lived his life, how he cared, how he interacted with the students. And so that always stuck in my mind. And so that's the same idea I stress to people. And, you know, we're all familiar with the saying, people don't care how much you know until they what? Until they know how much you care, right? And so if you are, as a person, going to be teaching, you have to make it your prerogative to live out that godly character. Number two, work ethic. Work ethic is key, right? And so I have the tendency to over prepare for any class. And so, you know, if anybody's taking a writing class, the professor will tell you to write, and keep writing, right? Write all that you know on a particular topic, on a particular subject, and then go back and edit later. And so I over prepare, and we'll spend hours preparing for a class or a sermon. And then it's only 30 minutes or 25 minutes, you know? So over preparing is good. And I use Luke 17, 7 through 10 for that. And then finally, the last thing is being relatable, a teacher's relatability. And so as I was going over this, getting ready last night, getting ready for today, I asked my wife, Karen, I said, hey, you know, how would you answer this question? And I, you know, gave the question that you just gave me, Wayne. And she was like, well, if we're talking about you, I think why your classes are so good is because people can relate to you. Mm. You're relatable. And so I'm like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's what I have right here, you know? And the thing is like, you have to be able, I mean, you think about the apostles, you think about Jesus himself. Jesus is a carpenter or a craftsman. You think about the apostles and their occupation. You know, these weren't men that were up there where they were so high elevated that people couldn't relate to them. These are craftsmen, these are fishermen, merchants, and some believe some of the apostles were merchants. And so you have to be relatable. People have to be able to connect with you. And so those are the things that I came up with. Now that list isn't exhaustive, of course, but I think those things work.
Parabolic teaching, right? It's exactly kind of what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. You know, it's relatable. It's things that were commonly seen, touched, tasted, experienced, whatever it was. Jesus spoke and people could all go, yeah, I get that. Right. I understand. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I often get frustrated at the notion that people, you know, make the statement, use too many illustrations. So I told someone one time, I said, boy, you would have hated Jesus's preaching. And they were just kind of like, what? And I said, that 90% that I've read of Jesus is parabolic teaching. It's rare, though it happens, that Jesus says, the Old Testament says, and dissects a passage from the Old Testament. He did do that. Yeah. He does read, we know, from the Bible, the Old Testament, but most of his teaching is the kingdom of heaven is like.
Right.
And then he's teaching in a relatable fashion. And that's the goal of all of us that we're supposed to do. And so the idea of picture illustrations, I think, are very important. And today, I can't help but imagine that if Jesus were here on this earth teaching, he would by no means be inappropriate with this, obviously, but that he would use PowerPoint to his advantage. Mm-hmm. And he would put up pictures of things and show people, this is what this looks like, and get an image in your mind about what we're talking about. And all of that would be done in such a fashion to help the listener be able to look back at a teaching that is memorable. Right. But then the idea of interaction, I see Jesus do that a lot, where Jesus talks to his disciples and he's inquiring with them and he's talking to them and doing exactly what needs to be done to make them think about what is happening. And the parabolic teaching certainly conveyed that to them with the parable of the sower. They make the statement, what does this mean? You know, and it was interactive enough that they wanted to know more.
Right. And
so that's the whole point. And it's hard, like you mentioned, most Bible classes are anywhere between 30 and 45 minutes on the low to the maximum end. Mm-hmm. And if you have 45 minutes, you certainly have a lot more time than normal. But the classes that we got at Memphis were 50 minutes long. You know, every hour is 50 minutes. It is insane to think that, you know, our instructors that we had taught, many of them, 50 minutes multiple times a day, and then also would teach 50 minutes twice a week almost, and constantly being, you know, growing and learning. And then you sit down for the first time in your own Bible class setting of, I'm in my office, I'm preparing my first class as a preacher, and you go, how much time do I actually have? There's no way these 20 pages is going to be done in 45 minutes.
That's right.
And if you're like I was, you look up at the end of the 20 pages and you go, We have 33 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions?
I didn't write enough.
You start to think maybe I need 100 pages, and so some of it's process of time.
Yeah.
No one gets to be an amazing teacher just by osmosis of overnight. Just all of a sudden you're amazing.
Yeah.
You craft it, you hone it, you work at it. But I do like what you said. Personality needs to come out. If you are more of a laid back individual, don't be, irreverent in this class setting of teaching in such a way that seems like it's inappropriate, but be laid back and approachable.
Right.
If that's who you are as a person, think of the YouTube videos we sometimes watch of people explaining how certain things are done. We're not looking like if I'm looking to change the oil in my car and I don't know how to do it because I've never done it. And I Google on your, YouTube a video, hey, how do I change the oil in a Tundra? I don't want a guy that goes, now, if you look on page 1 of the manual and he starts slowly detailing every aspect, I want him to be as relatable as possible and quick to where I know exactly what to do. And so I think that's a lot of great points. And I can't help but think about how Jesus taught so memorably, in his own way of parabolic teaching and stuff. Wayne, you got anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, Jesus, the master teacher. And I like where you started with this because I think it's true in every leadership category, everything that we might could answer this, that it begins with character. Mm-hmm. And because we're to be Christ-like in all that we do. And, that some have a better skill set in teaching than others. And that's certainly the case. But regardless, if we're being real, being ourselves, and our character is good as it should be to begin with, and we're being real and relatable, which is connected to that, right? Then I think that's going to certainly open the door for memorable class teaching, lessons that are really learned because you're going to be right there on people's level, talking with them, not above them, and things like that. And I think that's sometimes we just get a straight lecture sometimes, and some lecture settings that's fine, but in a regular Bible class, that's not the place. We have to be interactive in that way, and so I think that's great.
Yeah. Absolutely, Epifanio. When we think about Bible class, I think all of us preachers, we fear one thing more than anything else other than being unprepared, and that is a question or a disagreement. And not that we fear questions because we're afraid to answer them, but we fear the questions that are like, when God said in Genesis 22, such and such, what does that mean in scope of the New Testament faith today? And you go, I've never thought about it that way before. And so that's the kind of question we fear.
Ready for that one.
Where did you think of that? And so we start to say the typical preacher answer, give me a week to study on that and I'll be back with you. And then you start calling all your instructors and go, help. I've never thought of this before. So when you get a difficult question or even the worst one is obviously a disagreement, because it can go south so fast. Mm-hmm. How do you handle difficult questions and disagreements if they come?
So when I initially thought about this question, I thought, okay, well, here's a question that's asking about difficult questions. And this question can be difficult, right? So it's
we set you up.
Well, I appreciate it. So the first thing I thought about is when somebody does ask a question, I like to analyze the question and see if it's really can be answered in a simple way, or is it more severe, right? The severity of the question.
Right.
Then you have to say, okay, because there are some questions that you can answer promptly, right?
Right.
And so they need no long drawn out answer. You can get straight to the point. But the difficult questions, I like you said, Michael, I don't think it's anything. I don't think we should ever have a problem with being humble enough to say, hey, I don't have all the answers.
Right.
I don't know the answers to that question, but if you give me enough time, let me study this, I can get back to you. And I promise you that I will. And you better get back to them, right? And so, because they'll hold that against you. But here's the way my mind works. There are some questions that don't have to be answered at all, right? And I know you're talking about specifically these questions.
Sure.
Like, right? Some, well, you think about this. Some people like to argue. Some people are just argumentative by nature, right? And so there are times where, and I guess this is leading to that idea of disagreements, right? And so if there is a disagreement, and you may say something, people are not going to agree with everything you say, right? And so how do you handle that? Well, John chapter 8, right? Verses 2 through 11. We knew what the Pharisees were trying to do with Jesus, right? They were trying to test him. They were trying to get him to say something wrong. And so they asked him a question. Jesus stoops down. He ignores them, not once, but twice. And then eventually we know how that played out. But I think about what Paul told Titus, right? In Titus chapter 3 and verse 9, he says, but avoid foolish disputes, genealogies, contentions, strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and useless. Now, I would say this: if you can answer the question, answer it. Don't belabor the point. Don't beat a dead horse. But if there is a question that is tough, and I have plenty of those, go back, allow them, to be gracious to you, study it. But if somebody's just being, argumentative and just wants to disagree just because they can,
right,
you don't have to feed into that.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to say, hey, you know what? Let's talk about this after class, or we'll address that another time or something. Right. So you don't have to answer every question.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to let a class get away from you if you start going down those roads,
That's
know.
Right.
And so, and it's you can get someone who may be just trying to be a little contentious, and so the first question may be rather harmless,
right?
But sometimes just being wise enough to know maybe this individual who's asking this question, right, every other week it's like this. You know?
Oh yeah.
And if they're hitting you like that, I can remember on one occasion. This is just I'll be quick, but one occasion I would start Bible class. Actually, not even start Bible class. I'd say, hey, let's have a word of prayer before we get started, and I'd lead us in a prayer or call on someone to lead a prayer. And I would go to open my mouth to start, and I'd see this hand come up, and the guy's sitting like front row, right, almost, right there, second row, and I'm like, brother, let me get started at least, right. Hold your questions at least a couple minutes, I will get there. I know you got one, because every week he did, and I was like, but sometimes, you just gotta roll with it, in some of those situations and try to play it off as best you can. I did talk to him later privately and said, look, I'm not sure if there's something going on here, or if you just feel like you just need to say something every class or ask something. But it would start as an ask and it would end as I want to make a statement.
Yeah.
And so after a while, I saw what was going on and pulled him aside, and we just talked, and he calmed down a little bit. Then, a couple months later, that hand would come right. Calm down, brother.
Well, and sometimes people will persist in that way, but
that's not the usual situation.
Right. That's rare, right?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Go ahead. Oh, it's my turn to ask a question. Yeah. Sorry.
Remember the format.
All right. So in the last place, how do you go about encouraging buy-in or spiritual ownership in what's being taught? Mm-hmm. We usually teach by theme, for a quarter at least or something like that. And, as you're presenting a lesson, maybe whatever it is, how do you get people to connect to that and show some ownership in their own faith in those things and application?
Right. Well, here's something that I have a unique perspective, I believe, on this, because, and that's the way I'm going to answer this question, is because, I didn't grow up in the church. And so spiritual ownership is big to me, right? Because like it is my faith. I was convicted. And I try to think about this from my son's standpoint. We have 3 boys and all of them are baptized now. And so they're going to be of that class that grew up around the church, and, they had faithful Christian parents. And so you always have to consider the idea that you don't want them to be living off of your faith. And so the idea is how do you get somebody to own it? Well, first of all, Paul says in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 12 to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And so that's that spiritual ownership, right? But when I think about the idea conviction, I want to convict a person so much so that they don't need my suggestions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so it's like a great example of that is Acts chapter 2. And I love Peter. I mean, obviously Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 3, all the sermons in Acts are good. But Acts chapter 2 and verse 36, a lot of people will look at that and, if you're not careful, you'll say, well, Peter was just downright mean to the Jews, right? Why? Mm-hmm. Well, he said, look, you crucified, you're guilty of crucifying the Son of God. And then you see the response to that in verse 37. But I find it very interesting that Peter just said, "Hey, look, you did this.
Right.
You have to do something about that, you know." And that was that conviction that moved them.
Right.
So I would say conviction is very big. Now, I'm not saying you go out and you're just, hellfire and brimstone all the time, but you can make people feel that conviction in so many different ways. And I don't think conviction is a bad thing to feel, right? I mean, I'm
Right.
convincing you that there is a need in your life that or there's a change in your life that you have to make. And so I start out with conviction, and then here's something that's very, very interesting. And as I was brainstorming through this, I thought about it. Compliance doesn't necessarily mean conviction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, how do you get, people they show up every Sunday morning, they show up every Sunday evening, they show up on Wednesdays or whatever. And, that's good. Faithful attendance is what we want, right? The Bible
Right.
speaks on that. But if they're just coming because they know they have to, are they really owning their spirituality, that spiritual? Are they really having that spiritual ownership? And so I would say that the teacher can do this in so many ways. Teach them how to pray, teach them how to study, teach them what it means about repentance, teach them to confess. But this goes back to that idea of character.
Mm-hmm.
If they can relate to you, if they feel like, I can approach Epifanio, I can approach Wayne or Michael with this without being judged or feeling
Right.
any type of way, I think they're more likely to make that change, and they may ask your help. And I've been in that case.
Sure.
Where people says, "Hey, look, I need to be accountable for this. Can you help me?" Of course,
Right.
of course. So conviction, accountability, and always follow up. Always follow up. I know we get so busy, right? We get to the point to where we say, I got a million things going on, whether it's filming podcasts or preaching for Bible studies, but make time to follow up with them.
Yeah.
And I think that too, and you mentioned about your boys, and wanting them to have their own faith,
Mhm.
and they're introduced to faith and the concepts,
Right.
and even for a time, probably compliance, as you mentioned, because they're in your home and they're,
Right.
you're dragging them to church, right?
Right.
In that sense, but that idea, eventually you start to see growth in them, even from that standpoint of they grew up in this faithful household of Christians, and they saw mom and dad, they saw their faith, they saw difficulties even that you guys would go through, and how you came out on the other side, how you worked through those things, and God with you and cared for you and provided, and all that. That's building your faith, but it's also they're experiencing that as well.
Right.
But there is a sense of compliance to begin with, but moving them, making sure that they are, where they need to be, so that they have bought in, essentially, so that it's theirs. They own this.
Yes.
This is their spiritual walk. You begin to see that, and you're able to step back and say, okay, I'm starting to see them. These boys are becoming men, spiritually speaking, in that sense. That they're stepping up to this point,
and it's rewarding, is it not? It
absolutely.
really is. And so
100%.
And you think about our phones have all of them have a smart assistant of some sort. I will not say our phone's smart assistant name because I can't activate her and not have that go south probably. But I often will tell her, I did it last night. We were driving back from Atlanta. We'd gone to see somebody from the network that's, child had a heart ablation. It went well. Everything was great, but we went to see them because they were close. Mm-hmm. And as we were heading back, I had gotten a text message from one of the people that was filming with us this week. And it was them saying, "Hey, do you have the address?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I should send that again just so everybody has it." So I just told my assistant, "Hey, in 45 minutes, remind me to send this."
Right.
You can do the same thing with the calendar. Brother Webster taught us as a seminar on redeeming the time. He now teaches that in the graduate program of leadership. But he taught us about how when you are at a funeral or at the hospital and someone's passing away, put the date in your calendar, a recurring reminder, message sister, message brother about their loved one. Yeah. And next year, you'll wake up and the first thing you'll notice when you check your calendar is, hey, it's the 1 year anniversary or it's the 2 year. And it's a simple thing.
Right.
It takes us 10 seconds, but the follow up, it was harder to follow up. I'm just going to say it's harder to follow up as a minister 30 years ago than it is today.
Right.
But we let these things make us more busy than we've been. and it's easy to forget to follow up. And so use the technology to our advantage to try to help us remind people that we're caring for them and that we're there. You know, I've sometimes in recruiting will say, schedule a reminder to call and the prospect's name tomorrow at 3:30, because that's when I know I'm free. Or sometimes now that Apple has it set up where you can do the send later texts, I thrive on that because if I'm going to send I've done it to you a couple times where I know that he's not up at 3 a.m, but he'll be up at 9.
Right.
And so it's on my mind. So I type something up and I hit the send later button for 9 a.m. And then, you know, I'm up and I'm getting ready to go into the office. He's getting that message and now we're communicating. And all I did was take 20 seconds to do it.
Right.
We can certainly follow up with people a lot easier than we could. But the one thing I wanted to point out too was we have to teach people in Bible class how to feed themselves too.
Right.
That's hard.
Yeah.
We often have heard the people, you know, make the statement that you can't rely on the church to teach your children about God and all that they know about God, that a lot of it has to come in the home first.
Right.
The church is more of a supplementary teaching to what should be going on in the home already. If I teach people to be like the Bereans in Acts 17 and verse 11, and they search the scriptures daily to see what's going on, you have someone then that is every day thinking about the word of God. The best teachers are the ones that then see their students doing the things that have been taught.
Yep.
So if I get up and I teach that we should love God and we should do that, what would be the thing that shows me I've done a good job is by seeing a church grow stronger in the word of God and be more diligent in accomplishing the studies on their own time. And so before we close this out, about 30 seconds, anybody got anything to say before I do the final minute wrap up?
I think the opportunity that we have as teachers needs to be taken seriously. We need to work on our skills and our abilities, and some of that will come from maturity and time. But it's a worthwhile thing, and so there's opportunity always to train at the Memphis School of Preaching, right?
Yeah. Hey, you got anything else to add real quick before I close it out?
I mean, I appreciate everybody, you know, everybody's input here, but yes, it's all about discipling. You know what I mean? And so it's about, you know, we have to care about people, and that'll be evident. That'll be evident in everything you do, whether it's preaching, teaching, you know, hanging out, fellowship, whatever. It's evident. So
yeah, teaching that stays. You know, we're talking about this as we close it out. Must indicate that the teacher's done a good job. You know, you gotta be able to do it in a way that conveys the message in the best way. And certainly, I think all of us here, if we had 30 more minutes to discuss this topic, could talk in great detail about how the Memphis School of Preaching prepared us for that. And if you're a young man aged 18 to 80, those are the age ranges we accept, you have time to still come and preach the gospel and to be trained in doing so. We have a graduate program as well. If you're a graduate of another school, but you're looking for a reset or continuing your education, come to the Memphis School of Preaching and take apologetics, leadership, world missions, or broadcasting. Thanks as always to the House to House Studios. We'll be back Thursday with Epifanio for an episode of Did That Really Happen? Until then, take care and God bless.